Welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jesse Green.
Hey everyone, it's Jesse Green here. Welcome back to SavvyDentist.com and to the Savvy Dentist podcast. It is really terrific to have your company for another episode of the show. Now today, I am absolutely super excited because we are speaking to someone who I consider to be Australian business royalty, and that is Bob Ansett. If you were a child of the 70s or 80s, you would have seen Bob on TV for his budget rent-a-car business, being the face of the business, and you'll probably remember the slogan, "Budget drives your dollar further." That was Bob. Now, Bob is well into retirement now, but his brain is as sharp as ever. And in this episode, he unpacks how budget was the plucky upstart and really knocked off some of the major competitors like Avis and Hertz. And he distills those lessons that are really actionable and practical for business owners who are looking to grow and scale their business. Now, there are so many strategies here, so many insights, all wrapped up in these wonderful stories of adventure and stories of business success, and of course, overcoming hurdles and obstacles to achieve his objective. So do have a pen and paper handy. You're going to want to listen really carefully to this episode because those lessons are often dressed up in a story, and I want to make sure you capture all of those lessons so that you can apply them in your business and really, as Bob would say, drive your practice further. So without any further ado, here is the legendary, the one, the only, Bob Ansett. Bob Ansett, welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast. Joining us all the way from the wonderful Noosa. How's things in your world today?
Well, today's one of those rare days when we're getting a little bit of rain. Not much, but a little bit. So they're always good days in Noosa.
They are indeed. Bob, I'm a child of the 70s and 80s and I suppose a young adult of the 90s. I grew up watching you on TV and you were quite a staple in our house, you know, seeing you with the budget rent-a-car ads. And it's almost like I can hear your voice now and it takes me back to those childhood days. And so what I'd really love to talk a bit about today is your business journey. Obviously, you come from a very famous family, but you've been incredibly successful in your own right. And I'd love to explore your lessons around business. When it came to budget rent-a-car, what's the history and the genesis of budget? Because we all know it was a success. We all know it went really well. We all remember your face, and there'll be a younger generation that perhaps are not as familiar with that. But what was the inspiration for the inception of budget rent-a-car?
Well, I had just arrived back from living in the United States for almost 15 years, and I had made a decision with my family to return to Australia. And when I arrived at Sydney, someone passed me the Sydney Morning Herald, and I had a look on the front page, and the headline said, "No job for Bob." For many who perhaps weren't around during that period, my dad and mother had split up when I was 10 years old, and my mother married an American, and we went to live in America with my brother. And so there was a separation of a considerable period of time. Although when my dad had come over to the U.S. to buy airplanes, he would always stop in and we'd spend time with him. But nevertheless, I guess it was one of those journalistic things that brought a focus on the fact, I guess, number one, that I'd come back to Australia, and number two, that I'd have to find my own way. So I came back with a friend also who was a former Marine. I'd been in the U.S. Army, and we were good mates, and we decided that because of what had happened in America with election time, we were both supporters of Barry Goldwater, and we said if Barry Goldwater lost the election, then we're going to Australia. And so that's why I guess there was a bit of material that was published about us. We got a unit in Melbourne, and he went one way and I went the other way. And that was to hire a car and drive around to get a feel of the sorts of things that were happening in Melbourne at the time, and to look for a job primarily. And as it turned out, I hired a car from Avis. I did a bit of a study on Avis and quickly became aware that they were the dominant car rental company in Australia. Avis had the exclusive rights to pick up passengers and deliver passengers at airports. I thought that was a bit odd, and I was aware of a company in America. So I looked and discovered that there were two other fairly major companies and beyond Avis. One was Hertz, which was an international company, and the other one was one called K's, and he was a local and only operated in Australia, but was a very good performer in the industry. But he, like me, couldn't get on the airports. So I did a bit of research, and I had what funds I had left from leaving America. I managed to buy 20 and get access to a building critically positioned because it was right in the center of where the rent-a-cars were picked up. K's were right across the street, and Avis was just around the corner. And I thought, well, I'll join them, and I'll, in time, hopefully, achieve the things I wanted with the business. That was how it began. I knew what was needed in developing a business. And so it was with that knowledge I started Budget. And customer came in. There was only two of us to start with, a young lady and me. And I'd drop whatever I was doing and I'd just run up immediately and welcome the person. And if I'd get a booking on the phone, and maybe I didn't have any cars available at that very moment, I'd still accept the booking, and I'd go down and hire a car from Avis and bring it back and rent it to the Budget customer.
Oh, wow.
Which it took a while before they worked it out. Ultimately.
That's really cheeky, but I love it.
Well, it was important, and we would never say no to a customer. I mean, that was our policy. And so the things that we put in place within about 3 or 4 months, I hired a guy called Paul Menzies. Robert Menzies was the Prime Minister at the time, so I thought, well, he must be, this guy wasn't related to him, but I thought he must be okay, and we can use him in a good way, and we did. And so we had 3 of us all of a sudden, and suddenly we got up to 25 cars, and it was doing things that were basically unheard of. I started, when we got up to about 30 cars, I started doing TV commercials. Well, in those days, executives and managers of businesses never did any TV. They, this was against their theories of running a business. But I took it the other way and thought, well, I'll talk about my business and how it works and how we're differentiating ourselves from our competitors. And most importantly, that we're going to work toward breaking the airport monopoly that Avis have had for 20-odd years. Incidentally, my dad's airline had an exclusive deal with Avis. And obviously because of the airports, they had to.
There'll be a whole lot of younger audience members here who actually probably don't remember your dad's airline. Is it okay if we just pause for 2 seconds to mention that?
Well, I was born in Hamilton, Victoria, and my dad had a bus business there, and he ran buses from Hamilton to Melbourne. It was a pretty fair distance, and he was also really immersed with aviation. He had learned to fly, and he won an air race, actually, in a borrowed aircraft. He flew from Brisbane to Adelaide and won the air race. And anyway, he decided what he would do. He got into a bit of an argument with Robert Menzies, and Menzies said that he couldn't carry buses, people in buses from Hamilton to Melbourne for, I'm not quite sure what the reason was. So he went out and bought an airplane, and that airplane was the beginning of Ansett Airlines. And they became the major airline in Australia for a number of years. And it became an international airline. First thing I can remember, two things that I remember about my going for a flight in his airplane, took me up to Melbourne in it and back. My dad's business was ultimately much larger than airlines. He set up Channel O television and ran a television. He had Hayman Island. He had buses running around. He had motels and hotels. He was a very major player in business in Australia at the time.
He certainly was, and I think the apple, in that sense, didn't fall far from the tree, because you also were a major player. So going back to your dad's airline having a contract with Avis back at the airport, and so just circling back to that part of the story.
We arranged to have lunch one day a week with my dad and I kept pursuing this point about Avis. And the arrangements were that the Department of Transport at airports set up an arrangement that they called for tenders I think it was every 5 years. And Avis had over 4 successive tenders, had been there over 20 years at the airports. So I tried to persuade my dad to help in a couple of ways, and he said, look, I'm sort of hands off on that side of things. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to have a go at it. And I set up my principle in the company that budget drives your dollar further. That was how
I remember that tagline well.
One of our big statements, and we'd had that in play for the whole time that I ran budget. And then I'd be out at the airport, and I had one of the television channels would meet me out there, and I would talk about the fact how ridiculous it is that there's only one company that can operate their business at this airport. Customers that came into the airport, we couldn't rent them there, but we could take them off airport and rent them the car. I remember one day I made most of the papers, and Avis were just around the corner, as I said, and I went down there to pick up another car that I'd rented from them, and I got one of the television channels to come in and take a shot of me hiring an Avis car. That's the last one I ever hired.
They were onto you.
They were onto me. And I was talking to cameras in front of Avis with a big Avis sign. I said, and this is why budget drives your dollar further. We go out of our way, if necessary, hire a car from another company rather than say no to you when you come to want to rent a car.
I think this is a really important point. You challenge the orthodoxy of the business model. What gave you the confidence to do that? Everyone else thought you were nuts and thought you'd go broke, but you obviously were onto something and you didn't go broke. You were wildly successful. So what was it that gave you the confidence to do that? Because I think this is a really important lesson for people here who might want to do things differently.
Well, one of the things was that I spoke to many of our customers. I had a little tiny office at the where we were based, and when I'd hear a customer was coming in, I'd buzz up and have a chat with them. And it came originally from one of the customers said, we pay you this amount of money, and it costs us so much if we're going to travel anywhere. So we don't really travel great distances with the rental car. Now, that was the other thing that I saw would provide me with a little advantage, that by getting someone to drive a car from Melbourne to Sydney, which later was a pretty common thing, it gave me the clue I needed to think it through. work out the costs associated with it. That was the next best thing. And then save it for, well, the airport monopoly being broken. At the same time, we're introducing a new way to rent cars. And I've got to say that it was picked up around the world. People traveled to Australia. They found out about it. They went back and talked to whoever they hired cars from in other parts of the world.
Like you said, traveling longer distances was a massive opportunity, but it would also, I imagine, bring some logistics in terms of inventory management, having enough cars in the right locations at the right times. How did you go through that system as well? Because this is early days of computers, maybe there's some computerization there. How did you manage inventory?
What we did was the car would be turned, let's say we rent a car, someone hires it in Melbourne, drives to Sydney. They would, once they got there, they would take the car to the budget office in Sydney.
Yes.
And then they would pay the bill up there and so forth. But I saw it also as a major opportunity. Avis had airports for 20-odd years exclusively, and they were going to be tough to beat in the marketplace, even though they came in third on our tender. And I wanted something that was going to give me a highly competitive advantage over Avis. Clearly, Avis and Hertz and Case all came out and made their statements when they were interviewed by newspapers and radio and so forth that we'll go broke, that there's no way you can rent a car like that. And I'd set a target. We all wore a little badge, number 1 in 81. And I set that in about 1975, and all our employees wore that little badge. Number 1 in 81, well, we became number 1 in 1980. Suddenly, there was this massive shift from Avis and Hertz to budget. And of course, after 6 months, they all swung over to getting the drive your dollar further, as we used to call it. And then it became, I don't know, people from all over the world became aware of it and talked about it. It took us, we had to get on to, I think it was something like 46 airports within a period of 2 months.
Oh my gosh.
It was unbelievable. And, but we did it. And suddenly, they were learning about something that was unique to Australia that was happening over the next couple of months. At that stage, I thought that because of the awareness of what we were doing, and I set up budget in New Guinea, New Zealand, and in Vanuatu. Budget America weren't my best friends either, I've got to say, because the owner of the company came out. They were number 4 in the market in America, and he came out. Morris Bellsberg was his name, and he said, "You can't use Budget's name." And I said, "Well, I'm doing it." And he said, "You can't do it." I said, "Well, it wasn't registered. If you'd had it registered, you didn't think about Australia. If you had it registered, I wouldn't have been able to do it, but you didn't." Anyway, 3 or 4 years go by, and he's hearing all these good things about what we're achieving over there, where they're still struggling along in number 4 position. He then had been trying to get into Japan for, I think, something like 10 years without success. So he said, "Would you be interested in breaking into the Japanese market?" And I said, "Sure." Didn't quite know what I was getting into, the Japanese, but we did. My wife went over and she trained all the hostesses that we had employed in Japan, and we set it up, and suddenly Budget's a player in Japan. About a year passed, and another call from Morris Bellsberg, and he said, "Look," he says, we're in the UK, but he says, "We can't get on the airports." And I said, "Well, I'm an expert on that. So you want me to fix it?" And he said, "Yeah, would you?" And so we put in motion all the things that we went through in Australia. And we did. We got on the airport. Took us 6-8 months, but we got on the airport. So we were one of the first franchisees in Australia. We started franchising our business, the first car rental company that had done that. And so the same thing was happening in America when they heard about what we were doing. So they had a conference in Hawaii, and I went over, and he wanted me to talk to, because they were actually employing people that ultimately would buy the business, and this is how their businesses in those areas. So anyway, I explained the best I could what we'd achieved with it. It was the time McDonald's had come to Australia, which was that's what got me into it, and so therefore on we went. So that was from that we expanded the business. My dad had a company had bought Avis, which I was appalled at.
How were the lunches after that?
No, the lunches were pretty well dispersed with. He said, "Look, it's just a business. Don't worry about it." And I said, "Well, it's my livelihood, and people do come to our business. The television that I buy from your organization, Channel O, people coming to us, and we've got to treat them the way we want them treated." I mean, we did incredible things. People that come in late just before we'd to close at night, we'd run until 8 o'clock, and they'd be late. And instead of saying, "Oh, sorry, we're closing," we said, "Here's the car. We'll fix that up. Now you just follow us, and we'll follow you onto the freeway. You follow us onto the freeway." Those are the sort of things that we were doing. We were breaking into new ways to provide a service, a customer service.
I'm thinking like there's a couple of major innovations that you've spoken about, and because it's your story, it's easy to be casual about it perhaps, but I think they're really remarkable, and I just want to kind of linger on them for a minute because you're quite a modest person, but I think what you've really done is transform the national landscape, particularly obviously in that industry, but there was the getting into the airports and the lobbying that you had to go through. There was the flat fee rental per day, so getting rid of the dollars per kilometre kind of rate. But then in addition to that, there was the franchise model as well, which again had not been done in your industry. And it's really interesting you spoke about McDonald's because I've got lunch with Peter Ritchie coming up next week actually. You challenged the orthodoxy, you challenged the status quo. And I'm wanting to ask you about the underlying thought process. And again, trying to draw lessons out of that for our listeners. Were you born with that ability to think differently, or were you constantly searching? Or is it a left brain or a right brain kind of activity? Are you kind of wired that way, or were you able to just identify what was not really working and what the customer's pain points were that allowed you to kind of look at that model and change it?
Well, I had the benefit of living in America at a time when franchising was emerging over there. It was just, as I said, it was in the very early 60s, you started to see the McDonald's and others that were really starting to emerge and franchise the way in which they did it. Once the airport monopoly was broken, which was about 1978, I started the franchising process, and we had our major corporation outlets, all the capital cities were, and then the managers of those corporations would then start to look at, well, the Gold Coast, for example, or out in the outback a little bit. And so we ended up, and it was good that we did it because we then had 46 locations that we had to open at airports, and we couldn't have done it under any circumstances, but certainly if we didn't have the franchising in place by then.
It occurs to me, Bob, you were able to move quickly because you mentioned that it took 6 or 8 months to break the airport monopoly in the UK. It took about a year in Australia, I think, from memory. And to me, that seems like a relatively short space of time. So it feels to me like you were very, very good at taking action. You weren't sitting on your heels. You were really on that front foot moving forward. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the drive, the ambition, the energy. You know, everyone who owns a business generally is pretty driven and motivated. Otherwise, what's the point? But I wanted to ask you again about your speed of implementation, because 46 locations in a couple of months, like you said, you had the franchise network, but even still, that is remarkable. I wanted to ask you your secrets around rapid implementation or rapid execution.
Well, having to fight that airport monopoly, I picked up the techniques, a trip a month, every day a month for 3 or 4 years to Canberra to talk to senior members of parliament. In New Zealand, similarly. In the UK, similarly. I was able to explain why I thought it was important that they accepted what I was putting to them. And we paid money to be on all airports. So you had that extra person, extra business there that then had a bit of a reputation. Our reputation did grow. We were in the newspapers quite regularly through that period, on radio and on TV. And so there was a familiarity about us. If Avis came out with a TV commercial that was saying something different than what ours were, or that may have appeared to be better than our offer, within 24 hours, I'd be on the TV within 24 hours. Either explaining why it's not the thing you want to do, or, well, we do it, but we do it better. We had longer weekend rates. We had our holiday rates. We had all these things that we put to work so that we weren't just renting a car, but we were creating new reasons when people, I had one with, if your car's in for repairs, give us a ring and we'll provide you with transportation in the meantime while it's being repaired. Going on holidays, leave your car at home, drive to your holiday. Things that were never done before in the car rental industry.
You were in a competitive landscape. You had Avis, you had Hertz. As much as you had that competitive landscape, and they seemed to throw the kitchen sink at you, basically from what I can hear there. But what I'm curious to ask about is interest rates, because in the 80s, we all know that there was some recessionary times. There were difficulties economically. There was a period of financial turmoil in Australia. I was a teenager at that time. You've operated through cycles, right? You've seen the good, you've seen the tough, you've seen everything in between. And I guess what I'm trying to ask this for, about history repeating itself, or at least if it's not repeating itself, it kind of replicates closely. What lessons would you offer younger entrepreneurs, younger business owners, having had some lessons going through those times?
We didn't get rid of any employees, which seems to be the common thing to do today. We didn't lay off, to my knowledge, one employee. And it cost us. I mean, we did. We lost money on it. But budget was always promoted as a family business. We were a family. It didn't matter if you're up in Darwin or you're up in the far west. We knew them all. We had a conference each year, and we'd get a vast majority of them come along to the conference, and finding out the things that were difficult for them, or what we could do better. I had a policy that our managers had to spend 1 day a month working behind the rental counter, whether it be at an airport or in the city, so that they're spending spending probably 7 or 8 hours talking with customers and listening to what customers have to say about our business. And those things assisted us enormously. We were the market leader during that era of from the early part of the 80s right through until the end of the 80s. And so we were hit hard. But nevertheless, our customers were looked after exactly the same way. The services we provided, it was in many places you'd find that at the airports particularly, people would come in from interstate and they hadn't rented a car before. So we'd have one of our employees walk them out to the car, things that our competitors never did do, and probably don't. They don't until today.
No, they don't.
So we looked for everything we possibly could. And it was great. I enjoyed it every minute of it.
Bob, I want to say thank you for sharing your insights and experiences with us, because I think the lessons that you shared even though you learnt those lessons some decades ago, I believe that they're as relevant today as they were when you were running budget. The idea of innovating, the idea of taking care of customers, the idea of looking after your team through thick and thin, the idea of training well, are still core tenets of successful business, and all the other things you've mentioned as well. I want to just take a moment to say thank you, not just for appearing on this podcast, which I do want to thank you for because it's really insightful, but also for being part of my childhood. I vividly, as I said at the outset, I vividly remember the TV commercials. I vividly remember, budget drives your dollar further. That has stuck in my brain forever. So whenever I think of budget, I hear budget drives your dollar further. And to hear you and to see you, as I said, has transported me back to being a young fella seeing on TV. So thank you so much for all the work you did in Australia to reshape the industry. Thank you for all the contribution you made to all the families who interacted with you, whether they be your team, customers, or whatever. And again, thank you for taking the time to share all of those lessons and experiences for our audience here on the podcast. I'm really grateful.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for that. I enjoyed it. I still do a bit of public speaking. Not quite as much as I used to, but I still do it pretty regularly. And I'm 91, so what better could you do at 91?
Going strong, mate. Going strong. Bob, thank you once again. I look forward to talking to you soon.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist podcast. For more episodes, go to drjessiegreen.com/savvydentist. And to discover how to build a high-performance dental practice, visit drjessiegreen.com and download the free report.